504 office hour, hosted by the Vermont Agency of Education. Michelle, School Climate and Belonging Coordinator, and I'm here with Amy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Murphy. I'm the Inclusion Coordinator for the Early Education team.
And also, we have some other colleagues from the VTmtss team who are here supporting, monitoring the chat, and hopefully helping to resolve any problems that you might have accessing Teams. So as you join, please, if you can find the chat feature, please enter your name and your role. And then if you do have any questions about Section 504, you can put them in there. We have a lot to cover today, and we will be leaving some time at the end for questions and answers. And we also have a few that were submitted in advance. So today we're going to go through an overview of the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and how it fits within the continuum of support for students ages 3 to 22. And we're looking at this from early education through graduation. Specifically, we're going to give you an overview of the federal law, review a continuum of student support across early MTSS and Vermont Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, or VTmtss. We're going to review student-centered learning plans and where they fit across general and special education. We're going to provide a detailed overview of related legislation and regulations at the state and federal level, go over Section 504 procedures, review accommodations, supports, and services that can be provided under Section 504, and then close with a little review of the Office of Civil Rights and the governance that OCR provides for Section 504 law. And as I said, we'll have a little bit of time at the end for some questions and answers. So first, we're going to go over the context of where Section 504 fits within federal and state education law. Again, it's for students ages 3 to 22. So this Venn diagram visually demonstrates the interrelationship of the various education laws, and I'll go through each of these briefly. So Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, is the federal education law of the United States, and it was signed into law in 2015, which you might remember replaced the No Child Left Behind law. ESSA extended more flexibility to states in education and laid out expectations of transparency for parents and communities. Then we have Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which is a federal civil rights law that says no qualified person shall, on the basis of their disability, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or otherwise be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity that receives federal financial assistance. We're going to go over Section 504 in a lot more detail today, but really just wanted to reinforce the relationship it has to these other laws. The Individual with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, covers special education. This law makes available a free, appropriate public education to eligible children with disabilities and ensures that special education and related services are provided to those children, including early intervention services for infants, toddlers, and their families. And also there are some discretionary grants that are involved with IDEA. And then finally, Title II of the Americans with Disability Act, or ADA of 1990, prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in state and local government services, programs, or activities. Section 504 does fall within the ADA regulation, and we'll get into that a little bit more later in this presentation. So really just anchoring us to the belief that each and every student is served within the system of supports. We're going to go over the early MTSS and VTmtss frameworks that guide our work. So Amy, take it away.
Thanks. You can hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. We just want to emphasize the alignment between early MTSS and Vermont MTSS. So these frameworks are intended to be a continuum of support for students, ages birth through 22. So both utilize a systemic approach to decision making, for excellence, equity within a culture of continuous improvement. That that's going to focus on successful outcomes for each and every student, each and every child. So as you can see, the Vermont MTSS framework components and principles are going to help to provide each and every student with the academic and behavioral and social and emotional supports and services they need to succeed. The Vermont MTSS framework is a conceptual model for understanding how school systems work. The framework is intended to provide common language that describes components that have specific functions but are also connected. And at the center of the model is a systemic and comprehensive approach. So this holds the model together. So strengthening, coordinating, and serving each component. So high quality instruction, assessment, expertise, and collaboration are all familiar areas in education. And the Vermont MTSS framework involves expanded and interactive dimensions to these components that encourage deeper exploration and understanding. So just like the Vermont MTSS, everything that was just said, we've worked to align early MTSS. We're working for the same systemic and comprehensive approach. So early MTSS aims to improve early learning, social and emotional well-being, and competence for children, birth through age 8. We're talking about the alignment here. You can see both have a strong systemic support, and these are our key components. Both have, collaboration. We're talking about partnership and collaboration in early MTSS, effective collaboration in Vermont MTSS. We're looking at high quality. So in early MTSS, we're looking at the provision of high quality, culturally responsive learning environments across our mixed delivery system. Vermont MTSS, we're looking at high quality instruction and intervention. It's built in together. We have comprehensive assessments. So early MTS, we're talking about comprehensive and functional assessments systems, looking at universal screeners, early MTSS functional assessments. And then, for Vermont MTSS, we have a balanced and comprehensive assessment. So we're incorporating those things as well. And there is that continuum. Last key component for both of our frameworks, expertise. We in early MTSS, a well-designed professional development. For Vermont MTSS, it's expertise, but we're talking about the same key components working within that framework and having that continuum. Just to, we're aligning these also, the early MTSS framework aligns with the Vermont Early Learning Standards. And then we also would be remiss if we didn't mention the Vermont the Vermont Guiding Principles. So that's the language we're talking about each and every child and their family, each and every student and their family. It's as we go along. Okay, so then this is just going to be a brief review. Each and every child, student, they're supported with a continuum of support. So this approach applies to classrooms, schools, districts, supervisory unions across our mixed delivery system. So the response model is fluid and interactive. And at an individualized level, each and every student, all students receive a universal or core instruction intervention either in the classroom or from specialists, and then a few will receive intensive or specialized instruction, and that's documented in a student-centered learning plan. So this layered approach applies to each and every child student to ensure a sense of membership and belonging. Student progress data is collected across all of these levels to support and inform instruction and intervention. Schools use a multi-prong approach with system building. So we call it in early MTSS, we call it a two-prong approach. I mean, we're talking about the same kinds of concept within the framework. So multi-prong, two-prong approach with system building and the implementation of equitable and inclusive high-quality practices. So we're not looking at one or the other, we're looking at both. I think in MTSS, Vermont MTSS, you all have a self-report kind of system assessment, and then we have benchmarks of quality or a system inventory, and that's the equivalent of that in early MTSS. So we're looking at system and practices.
Thanks, Amy. So as we dig a little deeper, so we started off sort of the high level education law, then we started to look at the frameworks that we have in Vermont across all ages that we support as educators. And now we're going to talk about a little bit about student-centered learning plans. So students in need of support over and above what's provided at the universal or core instruction level may need a student-centered learning plan. Section 504 plans are considered a general education plan, while IDEA or individualized education programs, IEPs, are considered special education plans. The Vermont state regulation also offers two additional provisions for general education plans. One's the Educational Support Team or EST plan, and then also the Personalized Learning Plan, which came in under Act 77. PLPs are required for all Vermont students, grades 7 through 12, and recommended for students in K-6. They're generally student created, and also it's good practice to engage students and families in the creation of all student-centered learning plans.
And just important to note that ESTs also apply to children in pre-K, and that is the expectation moving forward. So early and pre-K is included in Title 16, Chapter 99, along with Vermont MTSS. And I think we're going to post that link in the chat. And that's going to, it's just going to take you, it's a helpful resource that's going to describe Vermont student-centered learning plans in more detail.
Thanks. And one thing I forgot to mention, we do have a one-page PDF that will include the links that we have to all these helpful resources. So if it's not in the chat, you'll definitely get it following up this presentation. So now we're going to start to review Section 504 law, which I mentioned. It's a federal law designed to protect the rights of individuals with disabilities and programs and activities that receive federal financial assistance from the U.S. Department of Education. For schools, Section 504 specifically applies to students aged 3 to 22. When we think about the protections under Section 504, and we're going to go through this in deeper detail, no otherwise qualified individual with a disability may be excluded from participation or be denied the benefits of or subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. And we won't open up all of these links, but just to give you sort of a visual, these are the federal and state laws that relate to Section 504. Our team, as I mentioned, has a one-pager with this information. And I did want to mention that we have some specific state guidance for early education, career technical education centers, independent schools, and also there's an agency Section 504 work group that's working on reviewing some of the Office of Civil Rights guidance that has come out. We'll cover some of it today, but we'll also be posting a frequently asked questions document to the website that will hopefully be really helpful.
So new referral to Section 504 consists of these three steps. So referral, evaluation, and eligibility determination. So local procedures may vary slightly. And then this just gives you, an idea. Creating a Section 504 plan requires some collaboration across the school system as well with families and caregivers. So this is a list of possible team items to include, invite, to the Section 504 evaluation or the annual meeting. So input can be gathered outside the process to the Section 04, a case manager and incorporated into the meeting discussions. So you can see we tried to, again, show that alignment between early education and school age when we're working within teams and working together to create a 504 plan.
Thanks. And so we'll get into the eligibility criteria in more detail. For a student to be protected under Section 504, 3 criteria must be met. And these are the questions that you're asking during that Section 504 evaluation process. A student must have a physical or mental impairment, have a record of that impairment, or be regarded as having such an impairment. And that's different than what we see under special education law. and the impairment must substantially limit one or more major life activities. This includes students that are medically diagnosed with disabilities, individuals who have a record of such of an impairment, such as a student who no longer meets the eligibility criteria for special education services, or there's a suspected disability or impairment, which could be identified from a parent, family, caregiver, or an educator or administrator. The impairment itself is not a disability under Section 504 law. It must also substantially limit one or more major life activities, which we'll give some more ideas and examples of that later in the presentation. All three criteria must be present for the student to be eligible for a Section 504 plan. To determine if the student's protected under Section 504, the school team, as we talked about, it includes number of members, conducts an individualized assessment or evaluation for which informed parental or guardian consent is required. If the student meets the three criteria outlined, then the 504 team will determine if accommodations, modifications, or supports are needed in the school setting for the student to access education. And Section 504 law guidance recommends that minimally every 3 years, the Section 504 plan is reviewed. But as a best practice, we recommend that on an annual basis, teams review the Section 504 plan to make sure that there can be adjustments made as the student enters a new classroom or school setting. And just to go in more detail of the protections, Section 504 covers these qualified students. So the qualification is really through that evaluation process. To be protected under Section 504, they have to have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity, have a record of that impairment, or be regarded as having that impairment. And Section 504 does require that school districts provide a free and appropriate public education, FAPE. That's a term that's generally associated with special education, but in the connection with Section 504 has with the ADA law, that it really is also a requirement. And let's see, next we're going to go over major life activities in a little more detail.
So major life activities, it's defined in Section 504 regulations, and I'm not going to go through the 34 CFR, but we can supply that if anyone would like that information. So it's within, defined in regulations and includes functions such as caring for oneself, performing manual tasks, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, learning, and working. So the list is not exhaustive. So other functions can be major life activities for purposes of Section 504. So in the Amendment Act, Congress provided additional examples of general activities that are major life activities, including eating and sleeping, standing, even lifting, bending, reading, concentrating, thinking, and communicating. So Congress also provided a non-exhaustive list of examples of major bodily functions, so that are major life activities such as the functions of the immune system, normal cell growth, the digestive system, bowel, bladder, neurological, brain, respiratory, circulatory, endocrine, and the reproductive functions. So the Section 504 regulatory provision, though not as comprehensive as the Amendments Act, is still valid. The Section 504 regulatory provisions list of examples of major life activities is not exclusive, and an activity or function not specifically listed in the Section 504 regulatory provision can nonetheless be a major life activity. So important to note.
When we're considering the need for a Section 504 evaluation, LEAs must establish standards and procedures for the initial evaluations and placement under Section 504. Placement here is similar to the definition under special education, but it's a little bit different because of the broadness of the Section 504 law. So another best practice is creating a monitoring system that outlines who's responsible for being, performing the Section 504 evaluations or coordinating and case managing Section 504 plans. Evaluations must assess the specific area of educational need. And if there is a detailed evaluation done outside of medical diagnosis or additional documentation, then that should be administered by a trained person in the school district or outside the school district. Determination of a Section 504 eligibility is made by the multidisciplinary team gathered to evaluate the student's needs and the student data. The 504 team includes persons knowledgeable about the student and the meaning of the evaluation data that was taken from a variety of sources. And then schools are required to conduct periodic reevaluations of students with disabilities. In the Section 504 law, as I mentioned earlier, a reevaluation is required every 3 years, but we believe best practice is annually.
And, I think you all can imagine, then we have our mixed delivery system that is also, working within 504 land. So when considering childcare and preschool environments, collaboration is going to be critical. If the organization is in receipt of federal funding, then they are responsible for ensuring the 504 process is completed and accommodations are met. Preschools can communicate with school districts, supervisory unions, to coordinate Section 504 support, and as students transition to public school systems. So we want to make sure that that there's not a gap as they're transitioning. We want to make sure that they have those supports in place that continues.
Thanks, Amy. Sorry about that. I advanced the slides. We're back to where we need to be. So when thinking about plan documents, I've had a few questions from educators about what specific Section 504 plan should be used. There's no specific 504 plan document required by federal or state law. There are, but however, Section 504 plans are legal documents, and students are to receive all of the services documented in a Section 504 plan. Some systems like EdDoc Vermont generate a document for schools to use. Other school teams have created their own documents. I do have some samples. If you would like them, please reach out. But really, typically, a Section 504 plan will document student and team information. It'll have the plan dates, the student's disability diagnosis or suspected disability or impairment with documentation attached from either medical providers or others that have provided that information. It would document the impact to one or more major life area, and then in detail identify the specific accommodations, supports, and services with detailed descriptions and responsibilities of the roles that would be supporting the student. Services and accommodations should address the student's identified disability and the need the student has to receive these services to ensure that the student's educational needs are met as adequately as those of their non-disabled peers. You guys saw, yes, so there's a question here about the 3-year reeval. So the guidance in the Section 504 law is that it's recommended, well, it must be done every 3 years, and there's a best practice recommendation that it's done annually.
And Michelle, didn't we
Yeah, sure.
our team just met yesterday to talk, about 504. Didn't Ernie also mention something about how they follow guidelines based off of IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, with that?
Yeah, so, and I'll try to address Shelley's question too. So 504 guidance is different than the IDEA regulation. So you're correct, Shirley, it's not required annually, but there are a lot of systems that follow the IDEA guidance anyway, just to make sure that they're kind of being proactive in that area and ensuring that students' needs are being met. So we do recommend an annual review, but the Section 504 regulation requires one be done every 3 years, and it's actually an evaluation. So some school teams may do a formal evaluation every 3 years and do a team plan review annually. So the evaluation is deeper, it's a deeper evaluation. You're reviewing student data, you're looking at needs, you're re-examining the disability area. And so all of that doesn't have to be done annually, but it is a good practice to at least go through the 504 plan with new teachers and service providers so that you can ensure that the student's getting what they need.
And that does absolutely align with, triennial dates, reevaluating individualized education program every 3 years and ensuring that, you have the most up-to-date data to show what we're putting in place is effective. And those annual plans help to support that as well.
So I wanted to touch on record keeping because the law doesn't really specify how records should be kept. I just wanted to give some best practice recommendations. And given that all of our schools and systems, well, many of them are using different core systems to track student data. Just a reminder that the student section 504 plan is a legal document. It is part of the educational record. It is best practice to distribute copies of the plan to parents, guardians, or teachers who are working with the student, but you also want to be mindful of confidentiality and privacy. So if you're going to distribute them in paper, you would want to make sure they're locked up in a cabinet. If it's done through the student system, then you could likely use the security that's built in. So you could attach it as a file within that system, and that system should have the security and only allow certain teachers and staff to access that information. But we want to make sure specialists and specialist teachers and any service provider who engages with the student has an understanding of the student's needs. We also want to have a consistent process and procedure for documenting, storing, and managing Section 504 plans. We know that gets a little more difficult when we have larger systems and students move in from out of state or move between schools. It could be from a preschool to an elementary school or elementary to middle. So similar practices are helpful, but also just making sure that you're contacting that next Section 504 coordinator or the principal of that next school so that the documentation can carry on with the student. And then I mentioned that they're part of the general education record. So we want to make sure that each copy or version of the Section 504 plan is filed within that record so that it can be sent along as the student moves through the educational system. And then a reminder that Section 504 is covered by HIPAA and FERPA. So we do want to be mindful of how we distribute this information. Section 504 accommodations services cover many areas of the student's school experience. It could be academic, social, and physical. The plan's designed to remove barriers, preventing students from accessing their education. So this could include an example of difficulty with focused attention, reading, writing, communicating, social awareness. As you probably already know, there's many specific areas that might need to have support services or accommodation. Academic accommodations might include modifications to the curriculum, access to audio textbooks, specialized software to assist with reading or writing. Students might receive extra time to complete tests or assignments, shorten assignments, or modifications to the grading system. So all of this can be incorporated into a 504 plan based on the student's individual needs. Social accommodations could include support services such as access to a school counselor or a social worker, taking breaks as needed, or avoiding situations that may cause stress or anxiety. Physical accommodations include assistive devices such as hearing aids or wheelchairs, specialized seating or positioning equipment, and modifications to the classroom environment, such as increased lighting or reduced distractions. The specific accommodations included in a 504 plan are based on the individual student needs. They're determined through the Section 504 evaluation process, which, as we mentioned, includes the parents, family, caregivers, school professionals, and also the student, if they're old enough to be engaged in the process. And pretty much any student at any age could be engaged at their developmental level. They often have lots of great things to say. There's a question about the accommodations. We can definitely provide some additional resources. Part of the fact sheet and the OCR guidance includes very specific accommodations by disability area. That's on that one pager. So that should be really helpful when you're thinking about a specific disability area.
And so for Section 504 early education, considerations, accommodations, and modifications require schools to provide each and every child with the same learning opportunities as children without disabilities who are enrolled in these environments. So we're talking universal pre-K, private, public programs, private programs. This could be in a child care within our mixed delivery system. So the school or private pre-K may do this by offering reasonable accommodation or modification. Michelle has talked about what's considered to be reasonable accommodations and modifications. So a few examples of accommodation modifications for in early education would be providing self-regulation activities like exercise balls, mini trampolines, fidget toys, Play-Doh in the classroom, providing suggestions for participating during circle morning meeting time, such as a choice of carpet square or a cube chair or a small exercise ball or wiggle pads, just different positions such as laying on their belly or standing, all of those things. Focusing on universal design for learning. So to do the UDL to inform what necessary supports or accommodations, modifications. Early MTSS, we talk a lot about universal and targeted supports, providing visual cues and cards and charts and schedules, transitions, scripted stories, using first then or stop, plan, do, or timers, all of those things to support. Assistive technology and communication supports such as computer software tablets or iPhones, iPads, classroom auditory system even. So develop an individualized response plan to focus on teacher practice and supports. So, we're also looking at how we as adults are responding to children and creating an individualized plan to support. Rearranging pre-K classroom environments. So to define learning centers, being able to ease through transitions between areas, across all routines and activities. So just, a reminder about the importance, again, I think it was on Michelle's slide, but just data collection to be able to measure the effectiveness of Section 504 plans, the accommodations, the modifications, the supports. So, that child student progress that can be monitored in addition using data and plans, as appropriate, and we can modify them as appropriate. So.
Thanks, Amy. I wanted to answer a few questions before I go on to parent
Yeah.
rights. So I hope I didn't confuse everybody. So the Section 504 plan, if the student's found eligible, will be created and it exists. It's part of the student record. Best practice is that you review that annual plan and make any changes or updates as needed with the 504 team, which includes the family, teachers, student, if possible. And then the guidance, so the Section 504 regulatory guidance that does say that we should do a 3-year reevaluation of, it's really about the student, is the student still eligible for a Section 504 plan? So that 3-year reevaluation is going through that same process of looking at the student's disability. Has anything changed? Is there an impact to a major life area? Is it impacting learning or some other area? that would fall under that major life area definition. So you don't have to review the plans annually. It is a good idea, and I think a lot of families and teachers probably appreciate that. But the regulation really says that we should do it we must do it every 3 years. I
Mhm.
use the word must. It's a guide. It's in the guideline.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
required.
yeah. So we had a few other questions. So is it allowed to have an accommodation for a student to have a one-on-one adult support? It can be added to a Section 504 plan. So if the students need, um, if the disability, if you've gone through that evaluation process and the student is found eligible for Section 504, and one of the accommodations or supports is a one-to-one adult support that can be put into a Section 504 plan, the team itself needs to consider is additional information needed. So, that would be the team would be gathering the student data and information, and if there might be a need for a referral to special education, that's something that we can't determine, through this setting, but it would be, the 504 could be put in place while that other process is ongoing.
And I think it's something the early team talks about, in addition to that, if you're looking at a one-to-one to support the child throughout the day, we really want to make sure we are intentional. We want to make sure that they are building skills if they do have a one-to-one. So, if it's because there is a gap in skill, are we using those universal and targeted tiers and intentionally teaching to close that gap? And you know, then we're considering beyond that if there is still a gap in skill, if we need that additional support, then considering that one-to-one. But we want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence with our practices as adults, and ensuring that we are putting those universal and targeted supports in place, intentionally teaching, and that's not why a one-to-one would be possibly needed.
So we'll go on to Section 504 parent rights. So schools are required to provide parents, guardians, caregivers a notice of their rights annually. It's an opportunity to review the relevant records. And also some systems like Adoc Vermont generate a document for schools to use. But also I've linked in that document that you received, the one pager, there's a link to some resources that available, fact sheets for rights under 504. The Vermont Family Network has published a guide for parents. So some of these other resources are sometimes helpful as we're trying to support our families to understand the Section 504 process. And before I get into the non-compliance, we have some examples of sort of what compliance and non-compliance would look like. I did want to answer a question was submitted before the presentation about disciplining children under 504 or what happens if a student reaches 10 days out of school, whether it was related to suspension. And so there is a guide in one of the links. There is a really specific and really helpful document. It's a fact sheet from the Office of Civil Rights about supporting students with disability and avoiding the discriminatory use of student discipline under Section 504. But I'll go through a little bit some of that information. So schools, yes, the question was, should a manifestation determination be done? And the answer is yes. So if a student, if there's been a significant change in placement, removal from class for longer than 10 consecutive school days, or a series of removals from class that total more than 10 school days, a school must conduct an additional evaluation of a student with a disability under Section 504, referred to in the guidance as a manifestation determination. So that's a helpful document, but if you do have specific questions, just reach out to us and we're happy to kind of walk you through that information.
And examples of LEA discrimination can include a school who declines to dispense medication to a student who needs it, to benefit from education, does not allow a student to attend a pre-K program without a one-to-one, fails to provide a student or family about the special provisions of, college boards exams that are available to students with disabilities. Does it provide an interpreter for a family guardian who needs one to attend a mandatory meeting, or forces a student to leave school early because that's the time the bus arrives for students with disabilities in order to pick up other students. So a good way to ensure Section 504 compliance is to periodically check and connect with teachers and students to ensure that 504 accommodations and services and supports are being provided as outlined in that plan.
Yeah. And really, so just as we get to the close and towards the end of this, just a reminder that Section 504 is an anti-discrimination law. And really, we're out of compliance if we're violating the provisions of the law. And also, other questions that have come in, if there is an accommodation, support, or service that was documented in the 504 plan, we're obligated to provide that accommodation, support, or service. So if the school feels that something has changed or the students' needs have changed, that would be an opportunity to schedule and talk with the 504 team so that you could adjust the plan. And in the educational context, I wanted to give you this information. The Office of Civil Rights, or OCR, has administrative authority to enforce Section 504. As I mentioned, Section 504 is a federal statute that can be enforced through OCR's administrative process or through the court system. So any person at any time can file a private lawsuit against the school district or a complaint to OCR. The 504 regulations do not contain a requirement that they do file a complaint, but that is an option. In addition, schools can ask OCR for technical assistance. You can also reach out to Amy or I or other colleagues at the Agency of Education if you would like any support or assistance. And just this is also linked on that document that we provided, but OCR has they've kind of updated their website recently, so they have a few more they've streamlined some of the information that they provide and added some fact sheets that relate to disability areas. So some of the information that's available is guidance documents and information by disability type, including anxiety disorders, students with depression, eating disorders, bipolar disorder, other medical conditions like diabetes, asthma, cancer. So they're really helpful information. It outlines what the disability could look like, how it might impact a student's access to education, and also includes sections with some potential recommended services and accommodations. Of course, that information is really helpful, but you would write a plan that's very specific to the student's needs in the local context.
And I wanted to double check. Michelle, did we put on that one pager the commonly asked questions about childcare centers and ADA? I was just going to
Yes,
put it in the chat.
we did.
Okay,
But you could throw
super.
it in there too.
It's just a very helpful. I mean, it's a document that Katie McCarthy, who is the early childhood special education coordinator for 3 to 5-year-olds in the state of Vermont, and myself, I work with Katie. We refer to that quite a bit. There's some great frequently asked questions and answers in that.
So does anybody have questions that we haven't addressed? I think I addressed all the ones that were submitted in advance. And MJ, I don't know if you saw anything. I tried to monitor the chat a little bit. But feel free to kind of unmute and ask a question or raise your hand, whatever you feel more comfortable. You will get access to the slides and the recording. Those will be posted on the VTmtss office hours website. Sarah, go ahead. And just remember, this is recorded, so probably don't want to say anything specific about a student or a school.
Sure. So more and more pediatricians in my area are diagnosing students with anxiety post-COVID and letting caregivers know that that automatically qualifies them for a 504 plan. In some cases, it makes sense. There is definite adverse effect and accommodations will be helpful for the student. But in other cases, we have on grade level students, no behavioral referrals, no truancy, pretty much a model student. And we are saying like they don't qualify for a 504 plan. And we're getting significant pushback from both caregivers and pediatricians. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to, I think I need something to land on when I talk to these pediatricians and families that says like, nope, they don't qualify. And I'm wondering if you can just speak to that.
Yeah, and we actually are collaborating with some area pediatricians because they raised, so there's some understanding that that's happening in some parts of the state, and we're working on some kind of guidance or a checklist or some kind of information that can be distributed through the medical model and to guide pediatricians on the types of questions to ask. So we're trying to sort of mitigate that issue. It doesn't necessarily answer the immediate challenge, but we're trying to mitigate that issue with information, and that can be distributed through medical providers through their network because it has come up and it has been discussed. But it really, you could definitely reach out individually if you want to talk through any specific cases, but it's really going through and explaining sort of that evaluation process. So if there could be a disability, but it has to have an impact on a major life area that is within the educational context. So within, sometimes there may be an impact, but it's in the home environment. And so it's really having a conversation about what could be done to support the student. It's really an individual case basis, but it's definitely something that we've heard from across our, colleagues across the state.
And I would just add that sometimes when we're using the data, that can take some of the emotion out of the discussion because it on the other side of the coin, parents are concerned. They just want to make sure that their child is able to navigate and have the best opportunities to be able to succeed. So, we all understand that. But, so sometimes data can take that emotion out and it can help drive the discussion. I would also say, are some of the accommodations that they're asking for modifications, is that something that's really already built into the district or supervisory union's MTSS framework? So if it's something that's very universal or even targeted, maybe that's something that's already occurring that the family isn't even aware of. And again, we can use data to say this, we are already using this and this is how effective it is. It's, it's supporting, such and such. So that might be enough to make them feel at ease that their child does have the supports they need to,
Yeah,
access and fully participate.
good point. And sometimes it is so when we get contacted, sometimes it's explaining the process because it
Mhm,
is, if you're not immersed in it and it's the
mhm.
first time you're being exposed to it, or your physician, you know, makes a recommendation, it's really scary. So sometimes it's spending that extra time explaining the process and going through it. And there is a question about the need, does it need to have a significant impact? And that's really sort of up to interpretation, but really under Section 504, the way Section 504 law is written, it doesn't say, it's broader than you would think, sort of as we measure it under special education law. So if there is an impact to learning, it's it's really up to the team to talk about that, and the family and caregiver, they're part of that team. So it's really coming to some consensus about what's that level of impact and what kind of support is needed, and if it's something that's already provided, as Amy said, or is it something that we don't generally provide to most students or during that universal or core um, instruction, is it something we need to add for a certain time during the school day or the school week?
Mhm. Yeah, I would just say, are they able to access and participate, fully participate, along with their peers that might not have a disability?
So there's a question about how would a student exit a 504 plan?
Mm,
So if you go through that evaluation process, it's as students develop and grow, I mean, they may still have a disability diagnosis, but it's still going through that same process of asking those questions, being very curious and going through, let's see, I'm wondering if I should bring that slide back up, but let me see if I can do it really quick. Yeah. So these are the 3 criteria. So is there a physical or mental impairment? Is there a record of it, or it could be suspected? So it could be something that either came from an educator, a medical provider, or a family member. And then does it substantially limit one or more major life activities, which you saw on the slide that Amy went through? That's a pretty broad definition. And Congress reinforced that it's a broad definition under Section 504. So if you go through that same criteria, and the student doesn't substantially limit one or more major life activities, then they would not, they could be exited from the 504 plan. Also, we had a little discussion recently about sometimes students are put on a 504 plan due to a medical need that heals or later is no longer impacting their ability to access education. And I do want to say, I mentioned within the educational context, so the 504 plans that we write support students 3 to 22 in the educational context, so that could be before or after school services as well. But Section 504 law applies to any entity, as a reminder, any entity that receives federal funds. So it could be higher education, it could be a workplace. So I was saying that in the context of the 504 plans that we write as educators, but the law itself does apply. So if your student or child has a Section 504 plan and they're going to a workplace or they're going to higher education, if that workplace or higher or that entity receives federal funds, they do have to support all of the accommodation services and that are outlined in that plan. So I know we have about 5 minutes left.
And look, the second part, Allison, most accommodations are UDL best practices, right? And I mean, I think we could agree probably a lot are, but I think there are some things that could be more individualized. When we were talking about early education, we talked about that auditory system. That's something that's, might not be considered universal. That might be something more individualized. So it can be a variation.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. Well, thank you. Thank you. If you have any questions, I think, let's see, I'll go back to the last slide. We have our contact information. Amy would love to get your questions if it's an early education. And I would, I can support anything school age, but we collaborate. So if just send your question and we'll get it to the person who can respond. We're happy to get on the phone or talk with you more if you have sort of a question about the law or even a situation and how to support a student in your system. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you have a good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Mountain College is set up for an exceptional student scholarship, and it does not specifically prohibit on